Hey guys, Mike here. Our Patreon page is up. If you want to support the show, head on over to patreon.com/The Road Stories Podcast. In return for your support, I've got some great stickers, keychains, and music. You'll get access to every song used in every episode, including this crunchy track. And yes, I said crunchy because I'm cool like that. All right, I'm done. Let's get to Art's episode.
My name is Art Cervantes. I am one of the co-hosts on the Driving While Awesome podcast and co-founder of the RADwood show and lifestyle event. I'm a huge gearhead, have always been around machines of all sorts, cars and airplanes growing up, and now I'm fortunate enough to make it my life and career.
Did I just hear airplanes?
Yeah. So my dad was a pilot, so as part of the whole gearhead thing, I grew up going to air shows and hanging out at the airport a lot. And a lot of my dad's friends were private pilots, and so we spent a lot of time in their hangars. And and my dad was an auto body and detail guy, and so on top of doing cars, he would also do airplanes on occasion. He painted a few airplanes, that I recall. That wasn't his specialty, but he did do some. And so, I spent a lot of time at the airport and flying with my dad. And that was actually one of my earliest passions. I'd say I was into airplanes more than cars when I was a kid, and up until about maybe 12 years old or so.
Well, that was a little different than what I was expecting. So was accessibility the issue? Is that what prompted the change?
Yeah, I think accessibility is one of them. When I turned, 15, that was what I could actually drive and what I could afford to do. Airplanes are extremely expensive, and it's a very expensive hobby. And my dad had a Cessna 152, which is, I guess, the equivalent of a Miata or something. Like an NA Miata. It's a two-seater, lightweight, very simple, very cheap airplane. But it's a good plane to learn how to fly well in, and it's very, maneuverable and can land on anything. So, there are a lot of parallels there between that airplane and an NA Miata. And, even that airplane, though, is still very expensive to maintain, right? So realistically, it just kind of boiled down to access, as you said, accessibility and what I could actually drive. And, my first car was $500 and I was extremely passionate about that. And also, I should say that, it's not like airplanes were like crazy, like I was extremely passionate about airplanes rather, and not cars. I was still into cars very much, but I feel like I was more into airplanes, especially as a kid, because I used to love building the models, and my dad was, super hyped on all of that stuff. And, as a kid, I remember building like an SR-71 Blackbird model and an F-15 and, F-18 Hornet and all of these airplanes. And so I was so nerdy and interested in all of the, the technology that went into them and flipping through my dad's coffee table books and stuff. But, that being said, I was always into cars simultaneously, and it's just kind of boils down to that, though, as you said, accessibility.
Whenever I hear $500 in the first car, it always piques my interest. So let's hear more about that first car.
Yeah, so, my first car was a 1971 BMW 2002. I actually didn't grow up in BMWs. My dad was a big Datsun guy, and I thought maybe that would be my first car. But as a high school kid, I always loved the 2002. I thought it was so cool, and it was just I didn't really know much about performance or anything like that. I was even as a freshman, I remember drawing that front end, with just the simple round headlights and a super basic little grille, and I was just super into the design. And when I bought it when I was 16, but when I turned 16, I bought the car and found it in the local, classified, Auto Trader, if you will. And I remember I had $600. The guy was asking $800 for it, and he was the original owner. And it had been sitting for a long time. I can't remember, 15, 20 years or something, who knows. and it was full of junk inside. And the car was like perfectly intact, but a little rusty. And, so he wanted $800. I go over there, I get a ride from a buddy and basically haggled him down to $500 because I needed to pay $100 to tow it to my house. And so, basically broke the bank at the $600. And, I was working at the local, at the amusement park here, the boardwalk in Santa Cruz. And, so I was just scrounging up pennies to spend money on this car after that. And, I got it home. I drained the tank, filled it up, and it fired right up. I on a battery and it fired right up. And, from then, from there on, I started to tune it up. I went through, the wires and spark plugs, and I started to do more research and went on the early sort of bulletin board forum type deals. And after a while, after driving it a bit, I decided that I needed an LSD. I put an LSD in it. I put BMW, the E30 bottle caps on there with wider tires. And so just, a stereo, just, stuff that kids do. And I kind of that started a kind of an obsession with those cars. And I ended up having 3 more after that.
Consecutively, or they were just kind of sprinkled in amongst the other cars that you owned?
Consecutively for about 3 years or so.
Okay, got it. So you fell out of love with the first one that you got, or was it too much of a hoopty and then you decided to get like a better car after that, or what was the reason?
No, I actually blew it up.
Okay.
Yeah, I blew the head gasket pretty badly, and I at the time I just I didn't want to spend the money to fix it, and it was going to be too expensive, and so I was too freaked out to attempt to fix it myself. And so what I ended up doing is I traded it for a running 74 with the big bumpers and everything. But it was just like a mishmash, it was almost like a Harlequin, right? Like a VW Harlequin. It was it had burgundy fenders with tan doors and it was 7 different colors. And I drove that for a bit and ended up, from, again, my dad being a body guy, I was always around the body shop. So I knew how to sand and prep a car. And so I sanded and prepped it. And I painted it with Rust-Oleum cans that Rust-Oleum that's designed for mailboxes.
Okay.
And so I painted it one uniform color, and I painted it it was like a tan, almost like Sahara, actually, very similar to that. And I proceeded to clean it up. It was actually a really strong driving car. It had a 38 Weber on there, and an exhaust and springs and whatever. But my car was a 71, so the person I traded with was stoked on the earlier model, and he had spare engines and everything, so he fixed that thing up. But so I had the 74, sold that, and ended up with a 4000 CS Quattro Audi. And I blew the head gasket on that. I'm just kind of fast forwarding, but it ended up in another 2002 after that, and that was a 75. And that one I actually built up pretty good and autocrossed it and stuff, and did Bilsteins and suspension techniques, springs, sway bars, steering wheel, 320 IS Recaro seats, LSD, carb, all this other stuff. And that one was one of my favorites up until, that was the last one I had before my most recent one. And, I'm skipping about 50 cars in between because I've had something like 60 cars.
Yeah. So Lane did kind of tell me that you have car ADD, and I want to delve a little bit further into that because that's a lot of work to find a car, to get it to the spec that you want. I mean, 60, that's a huge number. I don't think Jerry Seinfeld has 60 in his hangar. He probably does, actually. But the 60 cars to go through, it's a lot of time, a lot of effort. Talk to me about that. What's going on in your head that you needed to go through 60 cars in whatever period of time?
Initially, it started kind of out of necessity. I was just kind of flipping cars, and I enjoyed doing that. I'd like buying a car, sprucing it up and improving it, enjoying it for 6 months, and then selling it. And on occasion, I had a few of them at a time, hence the 60 cars. I'm only 34, but And so, that was kind of the thing. I enjoyed, like improving something and, making, some changes here and there, tuning up a car and profiting off of that. And so initially it was out of necessity because, kind of supplemented my part-time job when I was in college. And, me being a car guy, I really enjoyed that. So, and then after that, it became sort of like almost like not an addiction, but like almost like, is it a habit? I don't know. I just enjoyed really kind of finding cars, but then finding cars that I've always wanted to own and experience, and enjoying them, and doing the same thing again. Improving them and ultimately flipping them, hopefully for a profit. But the main driving force behind it, I should say, is that there are many cars out there in the world that I want to experience, and I have limited funds, so I can't just keep one or two cars and then continue to tack on more. Beyond that, I mean, it's a space thing too. I mean, I live in San Francisco, and I'm kind of lucky to have a 2-car garage with a driveway and all that, which is extremely rare. And so now I'm in that sort of realm where I have one car that I keep, and hopefully forever, which is one of my cars now. And then the other kind of spot is a rotating sort of, deal. And that's kind of the main thing though, is that I just want to experience as much as I can. And that's the only way to do it, really. I mean, I don't have a warehouse and I don't have unlimited funds.
Right. Yeah. That's a very creative approach.
Yeah. Because otherwise, life's too short, right? Variety is the spice of life.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. And I think with cars, it's one of those things where you're not really hurting anyone if you are going through a lot of different cars. It's all about the experience, right? So if you're experiencing different cars, unless you take all the catalytic converters off of all of them, if they even had them in the first place, and do whatever it is that you need to do to the car or to the motor itself, where it's just a polluting beast, you're probably not hurting too many people. You're not doing that many bad things with that type of an obsession. And in fact, you actually might be helping people, because it sounds like you didn't just drive the cars and then throw them out. You improved them as you had them, and they went on to different homes. And I'm sure that people that purchased them were happy about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely that. I mean, I don't, I don't get a car and then, make it a mess. I actually try to make it a better car, a better driving experience, and so, because first of all, I want to drive it and I love to drive my cars. So, I'm not okay with, sloppy suspension, sloppy steering. I want everything to be tight, and, I'm known to be pretty meticulous with my cars, and beyond the aesthetic sense, it's really important for a car to be mechanically very sound and for it to drive the way that I want, to handle well and to not have any clunks and creaks and all that. And a part of that is to make it run as well as possible. So, I want it to be healthy, and I'd like to think that I have a good reputation in that sense, especially people that have bought my cars can sort of attest to that.
Let me ask you a question that has to do with the cars themselves. 60, it sounds like a big number, but it really isn't, because there's so many different cars in this world that you could play around with. And you're probably just scratching the surface with 60 cars. Was there a certain theme? Were there certain cars that were pretty much, it's kind of like one like the other, like the 2002s? Or are you just kind of ADDing like myself, where you are going through every single make, every single model that you can get your hands on?
No, yeah, that's actually a very good question. And I think that's where I kind of tie in really well with the Drive Well Awesome thing, is that, we're all into, analog cars that are basically from the 80s and 90s. I mean, with the exception of that 2002 and a few others, I definitely stick to that era. I like cars that are nimble, that handle well, that are mostly rear-wheel drive. I did go into the whole Honda front-wheel drive thing for a while, but I just want cars that are well-balanced. I'm not a big power guy. If anything, I mean, I might be more into slightly faster cars than the rest of the crew. Like, I mean, I'm more maybe quick car fast than slow car fast. I like both, but I do like something that has a little bit more oomph. But I mean, by that I'm talking, 250, 300 horsepower max. I'm not, into supercars or anything like that. It's really all about balance and and also that specific era. So those two eras, the 80s and 90s, because those cars are still, they're modern enough to where they're drivable on a daily basis, and they can take a beating, and they're probably going to start every time, and they're not carbureted, and and they also look killer. And it's what I associate, as what like cool, like what cars were when I was growing up, right? And I remember my dad's friend in 1990 or 89. Like, this is one of those things as a little kid, like when he called my dad and he's like, all right, you got to come over and check that. There's a hardcore BMW fanatic friend of my dad's. And he's, you got to come over and check out what I just bought. And so we went over there, and I was in the passenger seat of my dad's truck. It was like a Mazda B2200 or whatever it is. And I saw Diamond Schwartz E30 M3, brand new at the time. And I was just like over the moon. I thought it was the most amazing thing in the world. And so there's like that, right? And I like to say that, there's been a major kind of shift in I guess a generational shift is something we've thrown around in interest in cars. And the E30 M3s, the 993s, whatever, these cars are our generation's Hemi Cudas, right?
Yeah.
And this is what we remember and look back on, like, as kids, and like thinking that's what was most impressive. And maybe in high school that's what we wanted, and now we're in a position to sort of pursue those and acquire those cars. But I don't know. In a nutshell, though, it's just that era, and it's that type of a car. I want something that's well balanced, ideally rear wheel drive, and that handles well. I'm not a drag racer or highway pull kind of guy.
Let's talk about the cars that were memorable and the cars that were not so memorable, because I'm sure out of 60 cars, there were some that were just fantastic and you had a hard time getting rid of them. And then there were some where you're like, I don't think this was a good decision. I should probably get rid of this car. So talk to me about those.
Yeah. Overall, most of the cars that I bought, because I do a ton of research ahead of making a purchase. And so I have a good understanding of what I'm getting myself into. And that being said, it's like reading someone's piece on Road and Track on a car, right? It's like, until you get behind the wheel, like, you have a general idea, but you may not like certain qualities or the way, it could be something as simple as the way a door sounds or the way that the steering is, or, like anything like that. But I guess the one car that's very memorably like bad for me was when I was in college, and then sort of immediately after college, I was really into Hondas and basically building them out to be like autocross cars, and so CRXs and Civics and Integras. And I bought a second generation Civic Si, and it turned out to be a nightmare of a car to work on, because there was absolutely no aftermarket support. And I came from, a second generation CRX, which you have, anything you can imagine. It's essentially like a 65 Mustang, right? Like, where you have multiple, hundreds of companies out there that produce parts and all these different setups. And so the second generation Civic, which would be the first generation CRX, that body style, they look great. And I always thought they were really cool and like rad little cars, but there's no aftermarket support. They have a really weird sort of archaic torsion bar front suspension with like a McPherson setup, and it's not like a coil spring. And then the rear is an old school like torsion beam rear with a coil spring and shock. And me tinkering with autocross stuff and like trying to build cars to Canyon Car with, that was kind of a nightmare. And there was that. There was also like, I wanted to do, more to make a little bit more power, and there really wasn't anything out there, and like, it was very highly specialized and pretty expensive for what it is, and especially for those cars, which are not very valuable. So I was pretty disappointed with that car. I don't really like the way they drive. I mean, they're okay. They look great and everything, and they're super cool. But considering, the second gen, the third gen Civics or the second gen CRXs are, fantastic handling cars. And, they actually, I just realized something, because there was a first gen Civic in the mid 70s, which was like the CVCC body style. Right. And then there was the second gen, which was the boxier one, which we only got a 1500 S or something like that. And then there was the third gen Civic, which is the one that I'm talking about. So it was a third gen, not a second gen.
Got it. Okay.
But if you look at what a first gen CRX looks like, that's the generation I'm talking about.
Got it.
But if we're talking fourth gen or fifth gen Civics or CRXs, those cars, they have a phenomenal suspension. They have great camber curve. And then they're super tunable. There's an infinite amount of swaps you can do that are plug and play essentially. So the ease of tuning is there, and that car did not have that. So kind of a bummer.
Totally. Let's talk about the good stuff now.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of that. And I think, as I mentioned, because I do a lot of research and whatever, a third gen Civic Si, which isn't the most impressive thing in the world, is not that great. I guess it's not big news, but, first gen, I had a 91 NSX, which is one of the best cars I've ever driven and ever owned. And that car is so good and so incredibly underrated. They're finally starting to come into their own and they're becoming more valuable, but they're very special cars, and they're just, there really isn't much to complain about. I mean, sure, people want more power and do the Comtech superchargers and blah, 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 blah. But if you want something that's perfectly balanced, that sounds killer, that looks amazing, that it just has all of that, sense of occasion, as we call it, that car is it. And it's a phenomenal car. I also had a 97 C2 993, which is the narrow body car. And that is, perfection to me. I mean, that's out of all of my cars, people ask frequently, because, they listen to the show and they know I've had a ton of cars. They ask, which one do I miss? And I really don't miss my other cars. They're awesome cars, but my 993, specifically my car, the way it was set up and everything, is the car I miss. And that's basically RS spec, ride height and suspension with, fixie FM10 wheels and aggressive alignment, corner balanced, straight pipes out the back, Fab Speed Super Cups with customer Carl pole positions that match the interior. It was a classic gray interior with black, and just such a beautiful car. And they drive so well. Some people say they lose, some of the character of the earlier cars, but it's just perfection to me. And I feel so in tune with that machine. I know everything that it's doing at all times. And it's just, it's a perfect balance of modernity with sort of an old school vibe.
Sure. That makes sense. Why not go back to that car to relive that experience? Or is the journey and adventure, is that more enticing?
It is definitely part of the journey. I mean, I think I'll come back to it. I mean, it's just a matter of time. I mean, there's still there are more things on the table. And one of them, I just checked a box recently, actually. And it's a 1990 Celica Alltrack Turbo. And it's a car that I've always wanted to own. So this is the ST185, the Carlos Sainz car. And always seemed interesting. I mean, I remember watching those videos, back in the day, and that thing jumping off of stuff, and just looking so awesome with that Castrol livery and all the great sounds it made. And so I found a really cool example that's built up, and I actually just took it on our most recent rally, Coastal Range Rally North, and it was a blast. I mean, I couldn't have asked for a better experience for the types of roads and everything that we did. So, but it kind of boils down to that, really. It's just there's still more that I want to try out, and ideally, I mean, if things go well here with a couple of our business ventures, we can afford some a little warehouse or something and stuff some more cars in there, and then we can start keeping these cars instead of just kind of moving through them.
Take us through the process of making a decision of buying a car. You've got your Alltrack right now. You wake up tomorrow morning, you go, I can't drive that car anymore, I need something else. How does that work?
It's a very weird feeling. It's almost like, I don't know, it's just like I've had enough of this, I've experienced it, I understand it, and it's a collective thing. It involves researching and learning about the things, and doing a lot of reading and understanding the history behind the car and the actual mechanical components of the car, and doing some work on it myself, and of course driving it and experiencing it and understanding how that works, how it drives, and and just really, I guess that in summary, it's like experiencing the car, and that involves everything beyond just the actual car itself. It's the maybe the forum community and seeing what that community is like. Doing some research on the car itself. Understanding the history behind it, all of that, the heritage, and then I'm like, okay, cool. This is sort of sufficient, and I get it. I'm comfortable with it. Someone else can go ahead and enjoy this thing, and I go on my I go down my list. I have something called the list on my phone in my notes.
Okay, all right.
And then I go and pursue that next vehicle.
Let's say you do all the research and you're really stoked and you're really excited because everything that you've come up with so far is pointing in the direction that this is going to be a great buy. And then you get out to wherever it is that you get out and you drive it and you go, oh man, that was a waste of time. Has that ever happened?
I'm trying to think. I mean, it's not a car that I've owned, but it's one that I've definitely pursued and have wanted to own for a very long time. It's still on my radar. I'm not sure if I will ever pull the trigger, but it's a 190E 16 valve Cosworth, a 2.3 or a 2.5. And yeah, they're great cars. They drive really well. It's a fantastic sounding 4-cylinder, especially considering it's a CIS, which usually is pretty muffling, CIS injection system. But the steering is super annoying. I really don't like steering boxes on sports cars, and it is not rack and pinion. So you have this vagueness on center that is very unsettling, and it just does not match the character of the car. Like, it makes sense in my 500 SEC, where it's just this big barge that you're just cruising in, but something that's supposed to be nimble and change direction quickly and all that, like, it just doesn't make sense, especially paired up with that high-strung motor and everything. Like, the steering is so important to me. Like, it's number one, and the soundtrack is very close. But that's one car that I've driven that I was, as I said, it's still on my radar. It's the bottom of the list, and I would have to find a very special one to pull the trigger. But it definitely dropped to the bottom because after experiencing that, I was pretty disappointed.
You've seen the one at 1552 hanging out in the back, have you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was just there. As a matter of fact, Matt is a very good friend of mine, and my Silicone Alltrack was actually housed there. I shipped it after our Grid Life event. I shipped it down here or to Southern California to their facility there in LA, or Carson rather. And I saw the car. I had seen the car before, though, during their open house, but I got to check it out again when Lane and I went down to pick up the Alltrack and drive it back up via PCH and whatnot.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah. They're very sexy cars, and I love the heritage, and they look amazing on the racetrack, but I just really don't like that steering box. It's very annoying. And also I'll say this, going back to, that list of other car I'll mention, E34 M5, phenomenal car, but also that steering box, super annoying. Like, it was the worst part about the car. Like, everything is so great. I mean, the motor sounds fantastic. It handles great for what it is. It is a big, heavy car, and they look beautiful. They're just so handsome. The interiors are fantastic, but that steering box sucks. It's such a bummer. It's a total deal breaker.
We can easily go on for days talking about cars. Instead, what I want to do is I want to transition into your role at DWA and RADwood. I really want to have you expand on what you guys do so that people understand how much time and effort you're putting into these things.
There is a lot of kind of collective effort going on, but I'm definitely more sort of on the partnership side and really helping out in that sense, and really trying to collaborate and get the name out in front of relevant people and brands and stuff like that. And so that's kind of my I guess interest and beyond just producing a lot of content is just kind of getting it out there and finding cool people to partner with. And it's sort of the same deal for RADwood. I'm definitely very involved with the operational side of RADwood. I mean, like the curation and sort of building out the layouts of the shows and the site plans and also the partnership side of things.
Let's talk logistics and what it takes to put all this stuff together. So you're operating out of Santa Cruz in the Bay Area, and these shows are all across the country. So what does it take
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of moving parts, as you were alluding to, and we all have our kind of place in what we contribute. Brad's like really heading up the social media element and like getting involved with the community, doing some of the marketing stuff, and of course writing pieces about the show, since he's a journalist. I mean, ultimately a writer. We have Rick, who heads up a lot of the financial stuff, and then Lane does a lot of the creative and operational stuff, logistics, and him and I basically do a lot of that together. But when it comes to the event itself, the kind of the practical, pragmatic stuff, it's a lot of permitting. It's there's also scouting of sites as well, right? So you do a bunch of research in the space that's going to be close to a metropolitan area. We talk about what regions are likely to have the types of cars that we want to see, and there's different approaches to figuring that out. But I mean, weather is definitely a big one, right? And one thing that we're seeing with Philly is that's actually very interesting, is that because of the weather, the stuff that we're seeing is actually very high quality, because people tend to preserve cars that they're very proud of, right? And they really care care about. And, that's likely not going to be the case for, that 1986 Toyota Tercel 4x4 with a flat interior. But you'll get those cases. They're rare, but they're out there, and we'd love to see them. We see a lot of that on the West Coast. I mean, especially in California, where we don't really, at least, I'm not going to say all California is the same. Of course, there's snow and there's that in some regions, but for the most part, it's it's on the drier side. There's no salt on the roads, and cars are a little more well preserved, even when they're driven, and so you're going to see a lot of cars that are drivers that are in decent shape, that were grandma's, like 85 Prelude or something like that, with low miles. So you'll see that. But out there, we're starting to see cars that are higher caliber stuff, just like rare and unique, and the Supras, there's some really cool import stuff like Euro stuff that we can't have due to our 25-year rule in smog and all that. Or the way, I guess I should say, the way that our 25-year rule works, because we can get the cars here, but they're technically still not legal because they have to be, CARB compliant. But I digress. So there's really understanding, like, places. There's the region, and there's like the logistics of getting to a space. It's like making sure that it's a place that's easy to get to for the greater area. In this case, Philadelphia is close to major cities in New Jersey and New York and New England. Ultimately, it's not very far, and it's easy to get to in and out of to the location that we chose. Also, something as simple as space to put hundreds of cars. We need space for hundreds of cars, and we need space for even more spectators, right? So it's really trying to figure that out. And but yeah, as I mentioned, a lot of permitting, everything from fire to vendor permits to police, security. There's a lot of liability insurance that goes into this stuff, and all of that can be very drawn out. And sometimes you're dealing with contracts and kind of nitty gritty, and trying to basically negotiate your way down to sort of the lowest level of liability insurance you have to buy, so that you don't end up killing your profit. But so there's a lot of that type of stuff, and then there's being smart about the layout, right? It's understanding what traffic flow is going to look like, where vendors are going to get the most visibility without being an obstruction, and curating the car placement itself so that you have interesting experiences. It's not just about placing some cars in a grid. It's like okay, how are people going to be able to enjoy these things next to cars that are relevant? Like you put two competitors of the contemporary competitors next to each other, or this particular backdrop suits this car well, and so without giving too much of the secret sauce away, I mean that's kind of in a nutshell what it's about. But then there's the practical stuff. It's like, okay, we need to figure out a way to charge people, and how does that work, and what's most effective, and using the right platforms for that. And then and then there's the marketing side, right? Like partnering up with the right people and making sure that the show has visibility in the right places with in front of the right people, and leveraging certain platforms for that. And so it's all of that going on at simultaneously, right? And something as simple as, there's trash collection and, there's porta potties that need to be dealt with. And so it's just accommodating a large group of people takes a lot of time and effort and thought, right? It's not just it's not a cars and coffee where you're using, infrastructure at a park that it can handle, 100 people.
Let's talk about the future of DWA and RADwood. I know that you guys are sticking to kind of your core cities for RADwood, but I'm sure there's going to be some kind of expansion as well. And it doesn't sound like you guys are slowing down. So if you can, without giving too much away, where is DWA going, and what can we expect to see with RADwood?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And so, with DWA, quite frankly, I mean, the podcast is still at the core of all of our activities. The goal is to have more rallies and there's a lot of demand for what we put on, the types of events that we put on, ultimately globally, and people are reaching out constantly and they see and hear about what we do, and they'd like to have that within their own region. So, rallies are something that we're looking to expanding in, and putting out more of, there's, talks of about of a TV show of some sort, with the DWA side of things. We have a lot of ideas. We've talked to some people that expressed interest in what we do and how we do it. So there's an angle there. That's kind of as much as I'd like to divulge there. But that's probably where you're going to see the most of DWA's sort of efforts going. It'll continue to be an entertainment type of organization. Where RADwood is there's a lifestyle component, right? And it's beyond expanding to new regions. We have also demand globally. It's going to be about incorporating more of a lifestyle element, and that's also a tricky thing because we have copycats already kind of like on our coattails, and I don't want to divulge too much there, but
sure.
I think it doesn't take a lot of sort of mind power to figure out what that means. But so we're actively looking at that and really kind of giving people an awesome experience and incorporating more than just the cars themselves.
How often are you going to be doing the rallies?
So for now, we just put on our second one of the year. Historically, it's just been one a year. We'd like to do 3 a year at the bare minimum. It's very doable, and it, again, as I mentioned, it really is kind of a regional thing. Expanding beyond California. We've talked about Pacific Northwest. We've talked about Four Corners. We've talked about Colorado. We've talked about some East Coast opportunities, and even other countries. So it really kind of depends on how our organizations grow and how we begin to include more people to handle some of the other tasks that we're doing so that we can commit to something like this and also to contribute, right, to help us put these on. Right now, we are holding this very close to our chests and our hearts because we're very passionate about what we do and we want it to go. We have our own angle to stuff. And so I don't foresee us including more people right now or at least in the immediate future. But RADwood is kind of an exception. But in terms of the rallies, I think, in the long run, it would be helpful to kind of, especially as we expand globally, right, or to other places, to have boots on the ground there helping us with that sort of stuff.
Sure. There's so many rallies, especially in California, because it's such a big place and there's so many great places to drive. Let's talk about the identity of the Coastal Range Rally.
Yeah, for sure. So, Coastal Range actually comes from the actual Coastal Range Mountains that run along north to south on the west coast of the United States. And so there's definitely the coastal element. We always include a little bit of water, or at least some vistas and then getting up into the mountains. But, the one thing that really kind of sets us apart is that, and we're very open and inclusive. It did sort of start as an 80s and 90s, event, given that there wasn't anything for us to participate in. We don't have supercars and we don't have pre-75 cars. And so we wanted to, go and play, right? And since we weren't allowed to, we decided, okay, fine, we'll make our own thing. There's plenty of demand and opportunity there, right? So especially understanding our audience. And so, we needed a place for the E30s and the NSX and the 944s of the world to go and have fun. And so we decided to do that. But also, we've sort of laxed and gotten a little more lax about that. And we really just want cool people that have cars, as we call it, that have sense of occasion, right? These are interesting vehicles that aren't necessarily, they don't necessarily have to be the most capable or the most amazing machines. They're just cool and interesting for people to discuss. So we're kind of like a moving Cars and Coffee, right? So
Yeah.
if it's something that you would take to Cars and Coffee, you can bring it on our rally, and you're going to have a good time. We do drive, very twisty mountain roads. So you definitely ideally want something that handles well if you care about that.
Yeah.
Some people are fine cruising along, and that's totally fine as well. But, it's a moving Cars and Coffee. We have a very cool laid back vibe where we have, multiple kind of regroup locations, and we spontaneously have like a little kind of gathering, and we incorporate good food and great, beyond the roads, just great photo ops and good people, so we do have more applicants than we actually have spaces always. But for the most part, since it's kind of a lucky thing, I don't want to say that we're super selective, but like the community that listens to us and that is interested in what we're doing just happens to be like a really cool laid back group of people. They're not pretentious. They love their cars because they're passionate about what they are, and they love to drive, which is kind of in the name, right? Drive Well Awesome. We like to drive our machines. Even, if you're super meticulous about your car and love to baby it, like you still like to drive it, and the patina that comes along with that is part of the ownership and the experience. So we're like that type of folks, and so that's kind of what makes it unique. It's just that it's a very interesting, diverse group of people, and you're going to see some air-cooled long hood high value cars, and you're going to see some 924s, and you're going to see 991 GT3s, and everything in between, right? That's what makes it cool. It's the variety.
For what it's worth, I think you guys are doing it right on these rallies. I think it's so easy to fall into the trap of rally equals big marketing, big stickers, big branding, big everything. I think so many rallies fall into the trap of this monetary kind of pissing match. And from the outside looking in, it seems like you guys are more concerned with the drive, with the rally itself.
Yeah, there's definitely that. I agree with what you're saying. And, it's also, we do have sponsors and we do have that, but it's not like, it's not super commercial, right? It's integrated in a way that it's beneficial to the attendees. And of course, we're stoked to have sponsors on board and to help give them exposure, especially in a very cool community of people and base of folks who, especially because I've said this before, and we sort of influence the influencers, right? We're the people that are talking to a community of people that are approached when someone has an automotive related question, right? And so they're the ones that are approached by family members and friends. And so it is a very valuable and core group of folks that is important for brands to engage with. But at the same time, our rally, the way that we set it up, it's also very beneficial for the participants. We're going to give them really cool stuff. We're going to give them swag. We're going to enter them to raffles to get like a set of Michelin tires, or whatever. So it's not just, hey, we're going to slap like all this branding on cars because we're going to get you exposure. It's about incorporating the people and integrating it well, which is also something that we do with RADwood and our sponsors and everything that we do. It's very key for there to be an integration beyond just slapping labels on stuff.
Art, first and foremost, thank you so much for joining me. It was a great conversation. Secondly, I gave this opportunity to Lane, but I'd like to give the same opportunity to you because I think it's important that people are aware of what you guys are doing with DWA and RADwood. So please take this opportunity to let the listeners know where to find you, DWA, and RADwood.
Yeah, for sure. So you can find us on drivewellawesome.com, drivewellawesome across all social media. If you're interested in hearing and reading more about the rally, go to drivewellawesome.com/rally. We have our latest news there. Also, of course, RADwood Official. That's where we have all of our activities going on there on social. RADwood.org is the website. You can see some of our past event coverage there, as well as kind of the latest information for what's coming up. And you can find me personally at ArtSees, so ARTSEES on social media. You're going to see a good mix of travel, family stuff, and cars. That's kind of my personal account, so I don't put as much car stuff in there. But if you're interested in seeing that, follow along.
Sounds great. Well, Art, thanks again. I really appreciate the conversation. It was great. I'm stoked to see what you guys are always up to, and it's always exciting and always fun. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for listening to our show as well. And I encourage your listeners to check us out. It's always great to have more automotive content out there.
The Road Stories podcast is recorded, mixed, and produced by Michael Senderovich. Original music is provided by Clarence in the Road Stories project. You can find more music by Clarence by going to soundcloud.com/Clarence Los Angeles. If you like this podcast, please leave us a review. It helps the show greatly. And lastly, please follow the show on social media at RS Podcast. Thanks so much for listening.